Welcome back, Fast Family, to my review of Fast X, the unexpected 10th chapter, or 11th if you count Hobbs and Shaw, which I do, of the at this point over 20-year-old franchise, from its humble beginnings being about street racing and eventually growing and becoming this globetrotting, over-the-top spy action subgenre all of its own. And it has been a rough road getting to Fast X because I did not grow up being a fan of this franchise. I did not care about street racing. But once they got to chapter 4 and began embracing the ridiculousness, the over the top nature of these movies with these larger than life characters, with larger than life personalities, and they began having fun with how far they can take the stunts, the action set pieces, and just have a ton of fun with the kind of stories they tell. I was into it, especially from 5 to 7. I even really like 8, but 9 really grinded me. I was not a fan of 9, and I almost checked out completely. But thankfully, I fastened my seatbelt,
He said it! He said it!
held on tight, and thankfully Fast X brings back a ton of the heart and the sense of sincerity these movies have about themselves. They know they're dumb, they know they're ridiculous, they know they're not grounded whatsoever, and they have fun with it. There's not this sense of cynicism that was so ever present in Chapter 9. Fast X does find a few issues of its own, which we'll get to, but I just love the sense of camaraderie and history between these characters, where you have story and movie after movie where they find an enemy and eventually it joins the family. And you have this family growing larger and larger, where you now have a full-on Avengers team of street racers going around the world, and that lends itself to some incredible action sequences. From the first one in Italy, where it's essentially the Indiana Jones sequence running away from the boulder, but it's a big ass bomb, and people are on cars trying to stop this bomb, or even a round 2 of a familiar chase in a familiar setting that we might have seen before in one of these movies, which we'll get to, or a highway chase scene in Portugal in a major Hollywood blockbuster. For me, that was incredible to see. The vistas I recognize, the highway I recognize, and it's present with these characters. And that was just so much fun. And these characters are a ton of fun. And the film finds interesting ways to freshen up the formula. Where in most other movies we have the family going on a mission, and while that does happen in this film, they get broken apart. They get taken away from one another, and you have these small sects of the family on one side of the world, another sect on another side, and then you have Dom going around trying to fix these issues caused by Dante, played by Jason Momoa. And we'll get to him right away, but the family being broken apart, you have all these different dynamics at play that are allowed to shine a little bit more in different ways than they have before. And so you get a little bit more time with each individual characters. They get a little bit more time to have a moment all to themselves that you remember. And that's the big thing about this film. You have moments that you remember. You have action set pieces that you remember and are so incredibly well shot. Whether you want to talk about the big, bombastic action set pieces or even more quiet character moments, if we can call it that, because this is essentially a soap opera running on adrenaline and fueled by mayhem. And we get that a lot. But the cinematography in this film really is cinematographying. It shows the heart that these films can have. And a big part of that fun, a big part of what makes this memorable is Jason Momoa's Dante. This is a purely psychotic yet flamboyant villain that you remember every single moment he is on screen. He is the best part of this film. He is one of the best parts of this entire franchise. You almost find yourself rooting for him because he is so detached. He's doing these absolutely grotesque things. He is unleashing havoc on the world. He's being an absolutely despicable human being, and he's relishing every single moment. He's taking absolute delight in the suffering he is unleashing upon Dominic Toretto. You're just into him. You have him paint the nails, the toenails and fingernails of people he murdered, and he's just pretending to talk to them. He is having such a blast. He is oozing charisma, and he is oozing the fun he is having playing this role. There are so many lines in this film spoken by Jason Momoa that are utterly ridiculous, and he makes them work because there's this twinkle in his eye of how much fun he's having, how much he is cherishing this pain, and yet his determination of unleashing this rightful vengeance on Dominic Toretto just makes him terrifying and intense at the same time. And he manages to convey all that. It even feels unfair to say what Jason Momoa is going for is camp because it's just undescribable and it feels like an understatement to call it camp. He is going for it like his life depends on it. And I absolutely adore every single thing he does and says in this film. And I don't know if it's going to work for everyone, but to me, it elevated this movie several notches just having him doing whatever he wanted. It worked. It's delightful, it's delicious, it's diabolical, and it's even unsettling. He's a treasure. That's all I can say. But he's not the only new character. You have Alan Ritchson as a member of the agency who is out to get Dominic Toretto. He doesn't agree with the policies of Mr. Nobody. And you have Little Miss Nobody, Brie Larson, who plays the daughter of Mr. Nobody, and they themselves are at odds. And I feel Brie Larson was wasted in this film, while Alan Ritchson actually has some really cool moments as well. And so you have this dynamic where the family is broken apart. You have all these new characters coming in. Our villain connects to a villain from the past, and he is a Portuguese character. He was born in Lisbon, so I'm going to attach myself to this villain. And you also have Charlize Theron Cypher, who plays a very different role than we're used to seeing her within this franchise. And John Cena's uncle Jacob is back, and he is allowed to play to his strengths, being an absolute goofball as Jacob has to protect little Brian throughout this film. And that dynamic works. So the film manages not only to find new ways of going on an adventure with the characters we know, but fix some of the stagnant and less appealing, amusing aspects of previous films while introducing a great villain that is a ton of fun to watch, but also makes the stakes feel personal. He has an immediate and direct relationship with Dominic Toretto. His attacks are directed at him. That creates natural tension, that creates stakes, and it traces a goal for this film and the ones there are to follow. We've heard for a long while this is the first of a two-parter, and since last week, we've heard this is the first of a trilogy finale for the Fast Saga. And there are a ton of people comparing it to Infinity War, and there is certainly something there, but it doesn't remotely feel the same. It feels the same in a sense where we're reaching a climax. It feels bigger, it feels bolder, while at the same time getting back to its roots, where it is over the top. It is unrealistic in so many ways, but feels generated by character, and that really works. What doesn't work is the fact that on paper, having the family broken apart where you have Tej, Roman, Ramsey, Han, where you have Dom here, Letty here with Cypher. That's interesting. We've never seen that before. We've never seen the family so spread apart. But this film does not know what to do with the rest of these characters. Especially with Letty and Cypher, Michelle Rodriguez said in several interviews that they did it all in themselves. The fight sequences, they didn't even need a director there. It shows. And it kind of shows that they didn't have a writer because a ton of these other members of the family, their storylines just feel scattered. It feels completely random and like you're missing key scenes and key plot points to get from point A to point F. And you're completely missing points B, C, and D. Brie Larson, like I said, feels wasted. She is more of a plot device than an actual character with only 4 scenes in this movie. Jason Statham's Shaw has one single sequence in this, and that's it. And it feels very much like the film is laying this groundwork that will make sense in the whole trilogy. But for this film in itself, everything that doesn't have to do with Dom feels scattered. At points feels entirely directionless. And that brings us to the major issue with this film that calls back to when Justin Lin dropped out of the film 1 week into production. Fast X, as ridiculously fun as it can be with its memorable action set pieces, seeing Portugal on screen in a major Hollywood blockbuster feels very scattered. There are a ton of movies happening at the same time, but it only gives proper focus to Dom's movie. And Dom's movie is immensely entertaining. But you got all these other threads here that feel like they're being glued together forcibly and don't really feel earned. There are moments in the climax of the film where like, oh, you're doing that? Oh, okay. Did not expect it, but that isn't necessarily good. And so it isn't a film that I can accuse of being directed by committee, but it's a film that entirely lacks a directorial vision. This film lacks any distinguished identity behind the scenes, and in a lot of ways, it feels like a best hits of the franchise, calling back to moments, to character beats, to plot points that we recognize and that we already love in this franchise, but it's mushing them all together. And at least for right now, for this movie as its own, it doesn't entirely feel earned. There is a mid-credit sequence that starts to allude of things to come and it starts to bring them all together and makes it feel like this movie was handled by Louis Leterrier, who brought us The Incredible Hulk and Transporters 1 and 2 with Jason Statham, but Vin Diesel dictated the direction of this movie. Vin Diesel dictated the story beats of this film, and you feel that. Especially because Dom's storyline that connects to everything that this villain is directly targeting, that's the only thing that feels cohesive, that feels like you're following this story from beginning to end without missing anything necessary. Everything else, there are ideas in there are head-scratching things that happen in there, and you just feel like you're missing so much, like you're constantly trying to catch up whenever you go back to any other character, any other story thread that isn't Dom. Still, I had fun. This is an improvement, 100% an improvement in every way in the last Fast and Furious movie. But before I dive into my final thoughts on Fast X, I want you to fasten your seatbelts and start the conversation in the comments below with your favorite Fast and Furious movie, your favorite moment from any of the films, and how do you rank them all, including Hobbs and Shaw. And if you want to see me talk more Fast Saga, there's a playlist right here with all the reviews I've done so far for any of these movies. My favorite is still 6, by the way. And if you really want to talk more movies and TV, this is the place to be. Consider clicking that subscribe button, and you won't miss any future conversation on your favorite movies and TV. Fast X does so much right, so much wrong, and so much wrong it somehow feels right. Jason Momoa is going for an entirely new level of camp in gleefully diabolical fashion, and the family dynamic genuinely feels reinvigorated with new challenges and a clear goal set in motion with interesting dynamics between protagonist and our villain. Ultimately, and for reasons I shall not spoil, this film will always have a big piece of my heart, and you'll understand it when you see it. I'm giving Fast X a B minus. Thank you so much for watching, Fast Family. Remember to share your favorite Fast and Furious movie in the comments below, and big shout out to my online family, my channel members who always support the channel. And until the next one, love each other and love the movies.